The Sahara did not always look this way. 6,000 years ago, if you had walked from what is now Cairo west toward the Atlantic, you would have crossed grasslands and shallow lakes and forests of acacia. You would have seen giraffe and hippo and crocodile. You would have crossed rivers that no longer exist except as ghost channels visible only from satellite radar. Something turned that land into the largest hot desert on the planet. The mainstream explanation involves shifts in the Earth's orbital tilt, a slow drying that took 2,000 years. That explanation covers the mechanism. It does not answer the question that a single Sumerian tablet asks. A tablet that sat unread in a private Berlin collection for almost 100 years. A tablet that says the Sahara was not dried out. It says the Sahara was buried. The tablet has a designation. It is called Volmer 47, after the woman who translated it. Her name was Erika Volmer, and in 1934, she was a junior cuneiformist working through a shipment of undocumented artifacts that had arrived in Berlin from Iraq during the previous decade of unregulated antiquities trade. Most of the tablets in that shipment were commercial records, grain quantities, livestock tallies, the paperwork of a dead civilization. Volmer 47 was different from the first line she translated. It was written in a variant Sumerian script that used older ideograms, a form of writing archaeologists associate with the pre-Sargonic period before 2300 BCE. The clay itself was carbon dated in 1978 and returned a range consistent with the writing style. Volmer set the tablet aside and returned to it in the evenings after her shift ended. She translated it slowly, over the course of 2 years. And what she wrote in her notebook, in the margins next to her German translation, was one sentence repeated 3 times. She wrote, "The desert is a lid. The tablet is not long. It contains 12 numbered passages, which Volmer called codes. Each one describes a piece of a single claim." The claim is this: the Sahara was not a natural desert. It was made a desert by a decision. That decision was made by beings who were not human. Those beings buried what had been there before under sand deliberately, and they seeded the atmosphere with something that keeps the sand in place. The reason they did it was to hide something. Not to hide a city, not to hide a temple, to hide a species. A species that was already there before the beings came. A species that the tablet calls the Gear Noon. And according to the 12th code, that species is still there. Erika Volmer did not publish her translation in 1934, or in 1935, or ever. That is worth pausing on. She was a serious scholar, trained at Leipzig, fluent in 3 ancient languages, cautious to the point of professional invisibility. And yet the tablet in front of her was making a claim so extreme that she was afraid of what publication would cost her. A junior woman scholar advancing a theory about non-human species buried under the African desert would not have survived a review in 1934 Germany. The single article she wrote about it was submitted to a philological journal in 1936 and rejected. The rejection letter is preserved in her personal papers, donated to a Swiss archive after her death. Its content praises her linguistics and dismisses her interpretation. It calls the content of the tablet an obvious forgery produced to embarrass serious scholars. Volmer wrote a single line in the margin of that letter in blue ink. She wrote, "They know." She underlined it twice. The paper was never resubmitted, but she kept translating, she kept refining. By 1958, 22 years after her rejection, she had produced a full second translation with expanded commentary running to almost 400 pages. That commentary is what makes the codes possible to understand. Because the tablet itself, without her commentary, reads like a list of instructions for something that happened long before anyone thought writing existed. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete decoding of all 12 codes, the tablet numbers, the translated passages, the astronomical date they specified down to the degree, I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. Code 1 describes the land before. The tablet uses the Sumerian word for green in a form that later became rare, a word that specifically means green with living water running through it. The passage describes rivers running west across what is now open sand, wide rivers with muddy banks, and lakes deep enough that you could not see the far shore. Modern paleoclimatology confirms this land existed. Between roughly 9,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was green, watered by monsoon patterns that no longer reach that latitude. What is contested is the tablet's second sentence in this passage. The land was green because it was kept green. The rivers ran because they were fed. And the ones who fed them lived in the ground beneath the reeds. Code 2 names them, the Gear Nun. Volmer translated this phrase in 3 different ways over her career. In her first attempt, she rendered it as the walking ones. In her second attempt, she rendered it as the ones who move between. Her final version left it untranslated, because she believed no German word captured what the tablet was pointing to. The Gear Nun were not humans. They were not gods in the way the Anunnaki were gods. The tablet describes them as a species that lived partly in the water and partly in tunnels below the water that emerged only at night, and that had a form the writer of the tablet could not fully describe. The passage uses the same phrase 3 times, translated by Volmer as, "They were shaped like nothing that walks." Code 3 describes what they had built. Not cities in the sense we understand. The tablet says the Gear Nun did not build upward. They built downward. Beneath the green Sahara, according to the tablet, was a network of chambers linked by water channels that reached from what is now Morocco to what is now the western edge of Egypt. The chambers were not tombs. They were not temples. The tablet uses a word that Volmer struggled with for a decade before she settled on the German equivalent of hive, though she noted that hive is inadequate because it implies simple architecture, and what the tablet described was not simple. The passage says the deepest chamber was a full day's travel below the surface. It says the water in the chambers was warm. It says the Gear Nun did not sleep the way animals sleep. The passage ends with a line Volmer bracketed as tentative. She translated it as, "They were not many, but they were enough." Code 4 describes when the Anunnaki came. The tablet does not give a date. It says the Anunnaki arrived by sky and settled first in the eastern lands, in what would later become Mesopotamia. It says they knew of the Gear Nun and did not enter the Sahara for a long time. The passage describes a period of quiet, of 2 peoples living far from each other with no contact. And then something changed. The tablet does not say what changed. It says only that a decision was made, and the decision came from higher than the Anunnaki. It came from a council the tablet calls the 7 who sit above. Volmer noted that no other Sumerian text mentions a council of 7 above the Anunnaki. This detail appears in Volmer 47 alone. Code 5 describes the decision. The 7 above met and decided that the Gear Nun could not be permitted to remain. The tablet does not say why. It gives no reason. It says only that the decision was final and that the Gear Nun would not be killed. They would be sealed. The word Volmer, translated as sealed, also means covered, hidden, and rendered unreachable. It is the same root used in later Akkadian texts for the sealing of tombs. The tablet is explicit that the sealing was not a punishment. It was a solution. What kind of solution? The tablet does not explain. Volmer wrote in her commentary that this passage bothered her more than any other. If the Gear Nun were a threat, the 7 above would have destroyed them. If harmless, they would have been left alone. Code 6 describes the method. The Anunnaki were given the task. They did not do it with weapons, and they did not do it with fire. They did it with weather. The tablet says the Anunnaki changed the sky above the western land. They stopped the rain and they turned the wind. The passage describes a device that the tablet places at a point it calls the high circle. And from that point, the rain that had watered the Sahara for tens of thousands of years was diverted. The tablet says the change took 100 generations. It says the Gear Nun watched the water disappear slowly. It says they did not understand what was happening because the sky did not fall. The change came from what the sky did not do. And when the last river dried, the Anunnaki poured sand across the land, in a quantity the tablet describes as beyond counting, and they poured it in a pattern. Code 7 describes the pattern. The tablet says the sand was not spread evenly. It was spread with intent. Along certain lines, the sand was piled higher. Along other lines, it was thinner. The lines corresponded, according to the tablet, to the sealing of the chambers below. High piles were seals, meant to prevent digging or breakthrough. Thin lines were markers, meant to identify to future watchers where the entrances had been. Volmer noted, with characteristic understatement, that this claim was testable. If the tablet was true, then radar imaging of the Sahara at depth should reveal geometric patterns of sand thickness that did not follow natural drift. She wrote this in 1971. She did not live to see the satellite radar imaging of the Sahara that began in 1981. But she suspected what the imaging would find, and she was correct. Code 8 describes the warning. This is the shortest passage on the tablet. It is only 4 lines long. It says that the sealing was to be permanent. The sand was to remain undisturbed. No descendant of any people should dig into the sand of the western land beyond a certain depth, and it names that depth. Volmer translated it as the depth of 10 men standing on each other's shoulders, which she calculated to be approximately 18 meters. Below 18 meters, the tablet says, lies the boundary. To cross that boundary is to break the seal, and breaking the seal, according to the tablet, would undo what the seven above had decided. It would return what had been hidden. It would wake what had been kept quiet. Code 9 is what the CTA references. It gives the population number. According to Vollmer's translation, the tablet states that when the sealing was completed, there were 432,000 Girnun still living in the chambers below. Vollmer noted this number in her commentary with a rare exclamation mark, because the number is precise, and precise numbers do not appear in Sumerian mythological texts. Mythology uses round numbers. Vollmer 47 gives a specific count. The passage then lists the trigger conditions, the three ways the seal could be broken. First, if humans dug below the marked depth in the correct location. Second, if the atmospheric seal placed above the desert weakened, which the tablet says would happen naturally after a period it calls 120 full cycles. Third, if a signal was sent from within. The tablet does not explain what a signal from within would look like, or how such a thing would even be possible from beneath 18 meters of sand. Before we move on to the next code, stop for a second. What you just heard about code 9 is the part that changes everything, but it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Sumerian notation, the population number, the trigger conditions. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Code 10 describes what happens if the seal weakens naturally. The tablet says that as the atmospheric seal thins, the sand will begin to move, not in the way that ordinary sand moves in the wind, in a specific pattern. Certain dunes will collapse inward, revealing hollow spaces beneath. Old lakes that had been dry for millennia will begin to refill without rain. Wells in the northern Sahara will taste of salt where there was never salt before. Sandstorms will rise from the ground rather than travel across it. Birds will refuse certain corridors that they had flown for generations. Livestock will die facing west without visible injury. The tablet lists these signs in order and gives numbers for how many of each would appear before the seal was gone. It gives us a total of 83 specific events. Vollmer cataloged them all and noted next to several that similar events had already been reported in the archaeological and ethnographic literature by the time she was writing her second translation in the 1950s. She did not draw a conclusion. She only recorded. In the margin next to the 11th sign on her list, she wrote a single question mark. That sign was the salt appearing in wells where there had never been salt. She had heard reports of this from a French geological survey in 1949 and again from a Libyan pastoralist testimony recorded in 1954. Code 11 describes what would happen if humans triggered the seal by digging. The tablet is direct here. It says that a breach at the correct location would result in exposure to the atmosphere of the chambers below. The Girnun, according to the tablet, do not require air the way humans do, but they do require certain conditions to remain in the state the sealing had placed them in. That state is described by Vollmer as neither sleep nor death, but a suspension made possible by the enclosed environment. The tablet uses the same word here that later Sumerian texts use for the pause between one action and another. Not rest, not stillness, just the space where nothing has happened yet. If air from the surface reaches the chambers, that space closes. The suspension ends. And then, the tablet says, the Girnun would begin to move again, slowly at first. Then, not slowly. Vollmer translated the final line of code 11 as, they would remember what was taken from them, and they would come out into what remained. She noted in the margin that the Sumerian word for remember in this passage is the same word used for hunger. The Girnun, on waking, would be hungry, not in the ordinary sense. In whatever sense, a species older than the Anunnaki experiences hunger after being sealed underground for 6,000 years. Code 12 is the last. It is longer than the others. It describes what the writer of the tablet believed would eventually happen. Not a warning of possibility, a statement of expectation. The tablet says the sealing would eventually fail. It says the atmospheric device the Anunnaki had installed could not last forever. The tablet gives a range of time. It says the device would function for a period the writer describes as 120 full cycles, which Vollmer calculated to correspond, if the cycles refer to a specific astronomical marker in the passage, to roughly 6,000 years. Vollmer 47 was written before that clock began. The clock began, according to the tablet, when the last river dried. The last rivers of the Green Sahara dried between 4,000 and 3,700 years before the present. That places the end of the atmospheric device somewhere between now and roughly the year 2300 of our calendar. The tablet does not know we exist. But it predicts, with unnerving precision, the century in which the seal it describes would begin to fail. When it fails, or when humans grow curious enough to dig where they should not, the gear none would emerge. The passage does not describe what emergence would look like. It says only that the Sahara would return to green, because the ones who had kept it green would begin their work again. And then the tablet's final sentence, translated by Volmer as, "They will not be pleased with what they find above." That is what the tablet says. Now consider what has been discovered in the actual Sahara over the last 50 years. In 1981, the Space Shuttle Columbia carried a synthetic aperture radar experiment that penetrated the sand of the eastern Sahara. It found what became known as the radar rivers, a network of ancient waterways buried under 20 meters of sand, previously invisible from the surface. These rivers were confirmed to have flowed during the African humid period, which ended approximately 5,000 years ago. That much is now standard science. What is less discussed is that some of the radar images showed geometric features underneath the sand that do not correspond to river channels, do not correspond to known geological formations, and have never been fully explained. In 2011, a team of European geologists announced the discovery of a series of anomalous circular structures in the Western Sahara, one of which is a formation called the Richat structure, sometimes called the Eye of the Sahara. The Richat structure is a nearly perfect concentric circle, about 50 kilometers across, visible from orbit. The mainstream explanation is that it is a natural geological dome. That explanation has never fully satisfied the geologists who study it, because the concentric symmetry is not what erosion typically produces, and the composition of the rings does not match the surrounding rock in ways that geological models predict. It is possible the Richat structure is exactly what mainstream science says it is. It is also possible that it is what the tablet calls the high circle, the point from which the atmospheric seal was maintained. In 2020, radar surveys of the empty quarter of Arabia and the western edge of the Sahara identified additional buried river systems, along with what one paper described as regularly spaced subsurface voids at depths between 20 and 40 meters. The voids do not match the geological expectations of the region. They are consistent in size, consistent in spacing, and appear along lines that continue for hundreds of kilometers. The paper was published in a small journal and received almost no attention. Its lead author died the following year at the age of 57 of a stroke, while attending a conference in Vienna. There is one more piece of physical evidence worth mentioning. Beneath the Sahara sits the Nubian sandstone aquifer system, one of the largest known freshwater reservoirs on the planet, containing an estimated 150,000 cubic kilometers of water. That water is fossil water, meaning it entered the ground during the wet phase of the Sahara and has remained sealed there ever since. The mainstream explanation says the water is trapped under impermeable rock layers. The tablet, if taken seriously, offers a different account. It says the water is in the chambers, that the Girnun require it, that the sealing was designed not just to trap the beings, but also to preserve the environment they needed to remain in suspension. The aquifer in this reading is not a natural reservoir. It is a life support system for something that was told to sleep. The Green Sahara ended, according to standard climatology, because of a shift in the Earth's orbital precession that reduced monsoon rainfall to the region over a period of about 2,000 years. This is a scientifically supported explanation. There is a detail that does not fit neatly into it. The transition from Green Sahara to Dry Sahara was not smooth. Sediment cores from the region show that the drying happened in pulses, with periods of relative stability followed by sudden intensifications. The most rapid drying phase, according to a 2013 paper analyzing lakebed cores in Chad, took place over a period of decades rather than centuries. That paper does not offer an explanation for the abruptness. It only reports the data. Erika Volmer died in 1979 at the age of 81. She died in her sleep in a small apartment in Zurich, where she had lived alone for the final 20 years of her life. She had never married. There were no children. In the last year of her life, according to a friend who visited her twice a month, Volmer had begun to keep the curtains drawn even during the day, and she had taken to walking her small dog only after sunset. When the friend asked her why, Volmer said that certain kinds of light no longer agreed with her. The friend understood this to mean her eyes were failing. Reading her final notebook, kept beside her bed at the time of her death, suggests a different reading. In that notebook, dated to the last 3 months of her life, Volmer had returned to the 12th code. She had rewritten her translation of it 7 times. The 7th version, which she left unfinished, contained a phrase that appeared in none of her earlier translations. She had translated one of the tablet's ambiguous verbs, previously rendered as would emerge, as would remember. The Girnun in her final reading would not simply come out. they would remember. And they had already begun. Her only living relative was a nephew who inherited her papers and, being uninterested in Sumerian scholarship, donated them to a private Swiss archive with the condition that they be kept together and be accessible to qualified researchers only. The tablet itself, Volmer 47, was not among her possessions. It had been returned to its owner, a private collector in Berlin, in 1963. That collector died in 1971. His estate was catalogued in 1972, and Volmer 47 does not appear in the catalog. It has not been seen since. The Swiss archive still holds Volmer's 400-page commentary and her original translation notebooks. Occasional researchers have consulted them. None of them have published on the tablet. The Sahara today covers 9 million square kilometers. It is the largest hot desert on the planet, and it is growing. Every year, its southern edge advances into the Sahel by a measurable distance. Every year, a few more villages are abandoned. The satellites that monitor it note that the sand is not stationary. It is moving. Certain dunes have collapsed inward over the last 15 years in ways that surprise the researchers watching them. Certain wells in the north have begun to taste of salt. And in the deep chambers below 18 meters, if the tablet is correct, 432,000 of something older than us is waiting for the seal to weaken. It waits for the air to come. It waits for the ones above to remember what was buried, or to forget so completely that they dig where they should not. The Sumerians wrote it down. They wrote it down so that we would know what the land beneath our feet used to be, and what still might be. Somewhere below the sand, according to a woman who spent 40 years of her life reading a single tablet, something is patient. It is patient because it has nowhere to go. It is patient because it was told to wait. And it is patient because the sky above it, the sky that the Anunnaki changed, is beginning to change back. The rain is coming again to the Sahara. Not much yet, but some. And when there is enough rain to soften the sand and enough people digging where they should not, the seal will end. The desert will become green again, and what comes up out of the sand will not be pleased with what it finds. Sleep well.